evening, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. We're back. It's been a minute, as the kids say, but we are 100% back, ready to get into all of the events of the Alberta politics over the last. We're going to go a week in a little bit because we've been away from the live shows for almost a month, but. So we don't want to. We would be here. We'd be here all night. Nobody wants that. Before we get into the events, the current events stuffs, we just want to do a little pre-editorial, if you will, because we did a social media post this week, and we got a little bit of feedback on it. Let's say the social media post was in reference to what we're going to loosely refer to as the poll. For anybody who's unfamiliar who hasn't been following our social media, lucky you. But also earlier in the week, there was a poll it was a private poll. It was not a poll that had been commissioned for public consumption. I'm going to say cautiously. And we were provided some of the information inside of the poll, but we were not provided permission to share it. And we only share stuff when we have permission from the sources. So all of that being said, we were given permission to speak to the broader terms of the poll, and the results were, let's go with, at the very least, surprising. Because if this poll is accurate, and again, it's important to highlight here that any poll is a snapshot in time. It is not a definitive, this is how things will be forever. It's just a snapshot in time. But what this snapshot in time showed was dissonant, particularly for progressives in the province of Alberta, because what the poll showed is that the NDP are actually losing ground pretty much everywhere. And that raised some people's hackles. There was maybe a little bit of hair lighting on fire that happened when we shared that information. Everybody asking, given how Danielle Smith is doing such a terrible job, how is such a thing even possible? And we spoke with a couple folks for what are the headlines. And the question that we got back, the answer that we got back from all the political strategists that we spoke to is, yes, Danielle Smith is terrible. But what is the story that the NDP is telling? And that's a very interesting conversation piece to get into. It's certainly one that will be quite polarizing, and we're hoping to have some legitimate experts on the show over the coming weeks to parse that a little bit. Because one of the things that you hear over and over and over in politics is, if you want to be successful, you have to be able to tell a story. And what's the story of the NDP? And right now, the story of the NDP seems to be, to a lot of people, certainly it appears the people who are in this poll, that they don't like Danielle Smith. And okay, cool. There's a lot of people who don't like Danielle Smith, but the $50,000 question is, what are you going to do for me? That's what people want to hear. People want to hear what the NDP not just would do differently from Danielle Smith, but what is the value proposition? And there's a lot of people making the argument right now that the NDP maybe need to do a little bit more work on telling the story of what their value proposition to the province of Alberta is. Because, to be clear, the polling information not only says, hey, they're in trouble in Calgary, hey, they're predictably in trouble in rural Alberta, but most shockingly is, hey, they might actually be in trouble in Edmonton, Fortress Edmonton. And this is where we wanted to start the show with a little bit of perhaps some historical context, because we don't have to turn the clock back very far to get to a point in time where the NDP were in effect a rounding error when it comes to seats in the legislature. The NDP blew through in 2015, and they were able to form government in 2015 for sure. No small accomplishment, taking nothing away from that. But it doesn't change the fact that when it comes to the political identity dynasty that people look for when we're talking about the province of Alberta, they're fairly new and fairly short-lived. And when you compare that to the conservative identity, there's a little bit of a much longer dynasty going on there. So, anyways, wanted to get there were a lot of people. We got so many messages over those little tweets and posts that we wanted to start the show off by addressing that part. But it's really important. I'm going to go to the chat here because Lynn is on the ball tonight. And this is an interesting little piece. And I had a bunch of people ask me, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Like I'm some kind of political expert, to be very, very clear. I'm not. But the answer that I was giving people is there's this program, and I'm gonna I believe the term is stan for a second, for the Jon Stewart for a second, because Jon Stewart has been doing on the weekly show, which is a podcast. It's available on the YouTubes. He just had Bernie Sanders on this week. He has been doing something of a postmortem of the U.S. election, and there's a lot of parallels between American politics and politics in Alberta right now. And if you're not watching that program, I think you're missing out on a lot of really important context and really important information. So, after you've finished watching this program in its entirety, of course, you should check out the weekly show with Jon Stewart, because it is not the same thing as the Daily Show. The Daily Show is a comedy show. It is, I would argue, when Jon Stewart hosts, probably the best show out there. Again, I said I was standing a bit. But the weekly show, that's a program that is much more serious. Jon Stewart is still as absolutely funny as he always is. But if you want to get a better understanding of where the NDP should maybe start to think about taking things, looking at the postmortem that he's been doing on that program for the last several weeks with experts, it's worth doing. Of course, again, only after you're done with tonight's program. And with that, let's get into it, because we got a lot to talk about tonight. The very first thing we got to talk about is apparently Devin Dreeshen's mom sent him to the legislature wearing his very, very, very best, most prettiest barbecuing outfit, because we saw Devin Dreeshen make a theatrical, I feel like is an appropriate word to use here, announcement in regards to the photo radar in the province of Alberta. Now, this is, predictably enough, a polarizing issue for a long list of reasons. But before we get into the weeds, which we're going to, on the whole photo radar question, there's a couple things that we just want to get out of the way right out of the gates. Basically, what the announcement is the province announced that there's going to be a 70% reduction in photo radar for speeding across the province. They're going to be mandating that municipalities have to say, hey, we've got this problem area. We're a little concerned about it. We would like to put a photo radar up there. May we please have your permission? Please, sir, may we have some more? And then the province gets to decide whether or not a municipality will be allowed to have photo radar up in that area. Now, again, this is just for the speeding. All of the cameras that do the red lights and junk, those are still allowed to be up. So there's the preamble. Let's get Devin. Let's get him to do the introduction for us, though.
For decades, Albertans have voiced their frustration with photo radar. Drivers have called it a cash cow, referred to photo radar sites as fishing holes, and with today's announcement, we will change that perception. While intended as a tool for safety, in far too many cases, photo radar penalizes hardworking Albertans without improving the safety.
So you see, he wore the bib because not just maybe he's a messy eater, but also because the whole theme of the press conference was killing the cash cow, which is a weird metaphor to go with, because you would think in a ranching heavy province like Alberta, a rural boy like Devin would know that cash cows are good things. You don't you don't want to kill them because they're good. They they're good. The cash cows are good things. But Devin killed the cash cow. He served it up. I'm not even joking. At the press conference, apparently he had a brisket that was symbolic of the cash cow that he was killing and eating because that's what he wanted to do. But poorly chosen metaphors aside, some things to take out of that initial opening. Devin's very clear. Albertans don't like the cash cow part. Now, here's the thing. I'm sure that the vast majority of Albertans who don't get photo radar tickets don't care that much about the cash part because you see they're not paying it. But one of the things that happens when people get caught doing something they shouldn't be doing is more often than not, they try to find they try to make an excuse. They try to find a reason. Oh, you see, it wasn't my fault. It's the rules. The rules are so unfair. I'm the victim here, even though I was going 30 kilometers over the speed limit. Um, that's a natural inclination that people have. I've certainly been on at least one occasion, let's say, I've certainly been in a position where I have been pulled over by the boys in blue, and I my immediate inclination was to be like, "Oh, but here's my excuse." But anybody who knows who's ever dealt with any law enforcement is the best thing to do is be like, "Yep, my bad." Because things tend to go a little bit easier when you take some personal responsibility for your personal decisions. One would hope that people in positions of leadership would maybe, I don't know, be the adults in the room. But no, we get Devin Dreeshin in his Sunday barbecue best wearing a bib. And he said some contradictory things because in that opening statement, he was saying, "Oh, there's no safety improvements. You know, people, the what we're seeing is it's a cash cow. It's all about the money. There's no safety improvements whatsoever." And it's not like he immediately after that cited an example proving his main point wrong, is it?
When we did our consultation, I think it was Camrose that actually said that they lose money on photo radar, but they're happy because no one speeds going through Camrose. So that's I think the whole crux of the argument for photo radar use is great photo radar with lots of visibility and people know that in a certain area they should not be speeding. That's effective and that's a successful photo radar program, and that's something that we want to work with municipalities to make sure that we can help them use photo radar as a traffic safety tool and not.
There's so much I love about that clip. So, photo radar doesn't work. It doesn't do anything for safety, except it does. And some municipalities are very happy with the amount of speeding that has been decreased because people are aware that there's photo radar. Followed by, and this is again this speaks to the undertone. It speaks to the subtext of this entire little gesture. People shouldn't be speeding in this certain area. Those are the minister's words, not mine. You can go back and listen to the clip again if you want, but he literally says, in this certain area, you shouldn't be speeding. Now, the corollary, the next phrase that goes along with that is, it's super cool in all of the other areas, which he was also asked about.
Some people might look at this and think you might be letting speeding off the hook in the province. What do you have to say to those people who might think that?
Well, we're not banning speed limits. Obviously, we last year took photo radar use off of the ring roads in Edmonton and the ring roads in Calgary, and we've seen that as a huge success. Drivers were happy to see that there wasn't going to be a photo radar person or site at the bottom of a hill or they would see that you would actually have a disruption in the flow of traffic of folks that know where there's a photo radar location. If they're keeping up with the flow of traffic, they put on their brakes and they disrupt that flow, and maybe those that aren't anticipating the slowdown.
Now, there's a lot to unpack here because, on one hand, the argument that the little guy seems to be making is, if you are speeding and then you encounter a photo radar trap and you know that it's there, you'll slow down. And that's just the worst because it interrupts all the other speeders. which is, I feel like kind of the point. But he's also doing a good job of conflating a couple of different things. Because when you're talking about a ring road, you're talking about a road that, for the most part, doesn't have traffic lights. It doesn't have intersections. You merge off, you merge on, but there's no intersections. And anybody who knows anything or has done any kind of research on which kinds of traffic accidents are the worst historically, the ones that involve all of the vehicles moving in the same direction in a straight line tend to be not that catastrophic. I'm speaking generalities here, of course. But as a general rule, if everybody's moving in the same direction, rear end collisions, for sure they suck. For sure, whiplash sucks. For sure, those soft tissue injuries suck, not diminishing any of that. But the reality is, fewer people die in those collisions than intersections. So trying to say, look, we've got all of these great results from Stony Trail. People are so happy that they're not having to pay the legislated penalty for speeding anymore. I'm saying that out loud is so dissonant for me. People are happy that they don't have to pay for the consequences of their choices. And we haven't seen a huge uptick in fatalities on the ring roads. Okay, that's probably true because everybody's going in the same direction and everybody's going roughly the same speed. But when we start to talk about the areas that they're going to be removing a lot of these photo radar cameras from, we're now talking about intersections. And when we start to have vehicles, instead of going in the same direction at roughly the same speed, now we're talking about vehicles doing the T-bone thing. That's where you really start to see the fatalities increase. So it's important to keep that in mind as Devin Dreeshen is saying, no, it's not that we're outlawing the speed limits. But one of the other questions had to come up. If we're going faster, and people are getting into more collisions at higher rates of speed, there's going to be more damage to vehicles. There's going to be more damage to people. What does that look like?
So your government is also in the process of trying to reduce insurance rates for drivers. Now, there is some evidence here to suggest that less photo radar equals more speed, equals more accidents, equals more claims, equals higher premiums for everyone. So how is this not counterproductive to lowering insurance rates for drivers?
So there wouldn't be a correlation between insurance and the use of photo radar for the province. So obviously we are, as a province, we're working on insurance rates to make sure that we can lower them. Our move to the no-fault insurance is going to have hundreds of dollars of savings that we anticipate when it's brought in. So trying to reduce insurance rates is a priority. It's something that we've heard from Albertans is a major cost that they're seeing going up over the years, and that's something that we are going to change. But obviously, when it comes to whether you get a photo radar ticket or you get a traditional enforcement ticket, we want to have better drivers out there. And when it comes to the photo radar, we ultimately want to make sure that it's used as a traffic safety tool and not just as a government.
And the question becomes, why not both? Why is it bad to have both? If somebody's breaking the law, they're putting themselves at risk, they're putting the other drivers around them at risk, and they get caught doing that. Photo radar, if you get caught speeding, by the way, no demerits. If you get caught in the traditional route that Little Dreeshen was talking about there, then yeah, you can start to get some pretty significant demerits. So it's important to realize that it's not just apples to oranges. People are actually getting off with severe penalties if they're caught by photo radar than they are caught by a cop. And one would think that the person who's making the decision to eliminate that entirely, well, not entirely, eliminate it by 70%, might be aware that there is a difference between those two things. But it's even more shocking that Mr. Dreeshen would stand up and say, no, I just cited cameras as an example of how photo radar does decrease speeding. There's no correlation between photo radar and insurance rates. Of course, there's a correlation between insurance rates and photo radar. It's several steps removed, and there's a lot of other factors in between. But to suggest that photo radar totally works which is what Devin Dreeshen said, not me. Photo radar totally works. It makes people slow down. And yes, that does cause lesser collisions. It causes less frequent collisions. It causes less damage. It causes less harm. But there's no correlation to insurance rates. It's just ridiculous. It's just a lie. And again, if you're going to do something that's purely populist for the sake of scoring points with the worst drivers, the most reckless drivers, then just say you're doing that. There's other levers of power that the province has to pull on here. But we're not addressing that with this. This is Devin Dreeshen saying, "Nah, we're just going to get rid of it because you should only speed in certain places." Now, he likes to talk about the cash cow. He likes to talk about how bad the cash cow is and how evil the cash cow is. And again, if you knew anything about ranching, cash cows are good things. But maybe he's just learning. Devin, if you're watching the show, cash cow, actually a good thing. You want to keep him around. But let's talk about the funding.
We talked to Calgary's mayor last week about this, paring back of photo radar opportunities, and she said it's in effect like the government defunding the police, because the police service would have to rejig their staffing to divert staff to traffic measures rather than solving crime. I'm wondering how you would respond to that comment.
Well, I think Calgary and Edmonton, they have about 80 or 90 peace officers that are part of the mobile sites. So how both cities would reassign those peace officers would be a better question for them to answer. I know other municipalities, they hire out third-party contractors to actually do photo radar enforcement. So that kind of on-the-ground decision would be better answered by Cal.
So, to be clear, the question that he was asked was, hey, given that the vast majority of the funding from these tickets goes back to the policing agencies to do policing stuff, and you're taking away 70% of that revenue, and we're going to talk about what those numbers look like in just a sec. Given all of that, aren't you defunding the police, Devin Dreeshen? And his response was, well, there's 80 or 90 people. I guess that the cities will have to figure out what they do with them. Like, if those 80 or 90 people are dependent on their jobs that they have because they're able to do photo radar in areas that the municipalities feel are going to be cash cowy, which, by the way, means people are speeding lots in, those folks, what's going to happen to their jobs? Is there still going to be funding to pay for those salaries, even if they are redeployed or contracted out? I don't know what the point of that was from Mr. Dreeshen, but even if that's what the city decides to do, the fact is this is blowing a fairly sizable hole in municipal budgets, in particular in municipal policing budgets. But maybe the province recognizes that blowing a sizable hole in budgets, that's no good. Maybe they're going to backfill it somehow. Maybe they're going to step in and do the right thing to make sure that policing and speed enforcement and all of those other things doesn't suffer because the province decided that you should only have to worry about speeding in certain areas.
I'm wondering, will there be a commitment to match the revenue that the municipalities otherwise would have got from these sites?
No, and at the end of the day, this is going to be hit to the province as well. There was the ticket revenue off of photo radar was a share between the province of Alberta and the municipalities. So with the cash cow being eliminated from these certain sites that were ticketing issuing hundreds of tickets a day, and collecting millions of dollars at the end of the day, that will affect the province's bottom line as well as the municipalities. But again, the whole point of getting rid of these cash cow locations is to make sure that photo radar is used as a traffic safety tool and not as a revenue generator. So there won't be any top ups to the municipalities for losing out
Okay, so the municipalities, they're just screwed. They just lose out on the money. But how much money are we actually talking about here? What's the dollars and cents of this whole conversation? Because it didn't take very long for the Calgary police chief and many others to start blasting the province over the decisions that they were making. Because it turns out police weren't consulted in any way, shape, or form in regards to should this policy be a thing? How should this policy be ruled out? None of this is just Devin on the back of a napkin. Do with that what you will. Making up these rules, trying to score some points with the bad drivers. So how much money are we talking about? Well, last year, the province of Alberta, municipalities charged, call it what you will, I don't care, $145 million. Now, we're talking about a 70% reduction in that revenue, which works out to being about $100 million that municipalities are going to be losing out on. But where does that money go? And it turns out it varies a little bit from city to city to town to town. So we're going to look at the two biggest ones. Let's talk about Calgary first. In Calgary, 15% of the total fine amount is given to victim services. 16.67% goes to the provincial government, and the balance of the fine goes to the municipal government. If there's late penalties so attached to the fine, the province receives the surcharge associated with the ticket. So if the person pays late, the province actually makes bank. But the big number that I want to draw your attention to right there is that 15%. That 15% that goes to victim services. Because when we're talking about a reduction of $100 million, we're talking about a $15 million reduction in victim services, which is huge across the province of Alberta, especially at a time where the province has made some sweeping changes to how victim services are provided outside of the major municipalities. Let's take a look at Edmonton. What does Edmonton do with the fines? Well, they actually give even more to victim services. 20% of the total fine goes to the Victims of Crime Fund. 40% goes to the Alberta government. The remaining fine balance goes to the Reserve Fund to support council's traffic safety priorities. Now, these are the most recent numbers that we could find on either the City of Calgary's website or the City of Edmonton's website. And the specific breakdowns are actually a little bit more tricky to find. But at the end of the day, what we can safely say is 15 to 20% of the total funding that is collected through Photo Radar goes towards victim services. These are the people who help the victims of crime. These are the people who help the families who are the victims of crime. Victim Services also runs programs like sending the emotional support dogs to trial. And it's easy to scoff at that. But when you hear some of the stories that some of these dogs are helping people navigate, when we start to talk about stories of child abuse, and the only reason that that kid is able to sit in that courtroom is because they have one of these dogs sitting beside them, it gets to be really, really important, really, really quickly. So I want to be perfectly clear. It is not in any way hyperbolic to say that this decision by the province of Alberta to score points with, again, people who are choosing to speed is literally going to be taking resources away from victims of crime, victims of sexual assault, and the surviving family members of people who have been murdered. That is not hyperbolic. We're talking about $15 to $20 million that is just gone because Devin Dreeshen wanted to pose in his bestest Sunday bib and try to serve members of the press roast beef. But we're still not done. Because the reality is, whether you like it or not, speed does contribute massively in regards to what happens when people are involved in collisions. According to Transport Canada, speeding was a contributing factor in 1 in 4 fatal collisions. Distracted driving, the kind of driving you're doing when you're just driving down the road and then somebody slows down for a speed trap and, oh my gosh, I have to slow down all of a sudden. That kind of driving where that is overwhelming for you because you were, I guess, doing something that wasn't driving. That distracted driving is responsible for 1 in 5 fatalities on the road. And when it comes to pedestrians, because again, we're not talking in this conversation that we're having with Mr. Dreeshen here, we're not talking about highways. We're talking about municipal roads. We're talking about the streets inside of our cities and towns, where cities and towns have said, hey, this is a problem area. And in fact, the Calgary chief of police cited examples in his press conference where he said, since we've had photo radar, we have not had one fatal accident in this intersection. Because again, as I said earlier, intersections are where the really big bad tends to happen. But when we start to talk about pedestrians, because again, we're talking about inside of our cities and our towns, the survival rate by vehicle speed changes the faster you go. At 30 kilometers an hour, 9 out of 10 people survive. At 40 kilometers an hour, 6 out of 10 people survive. At 50 kilometers an hour, 2 out of 10 people survive. And when you go above 60 kilometers an hour, the survival rate for a pedestrian being struck by a car drops to almost zero. That is from, for the record, the Canadian Association of Road Safety Professionals. So it's not as if there's a lack of evidence that suggests there's actually really good reasons for these. And if money is raised that goes towards supporting the victims of crime, that's okay by me. And this gets to the bigger point, because if you want to say, oh, yeah, but Edmonton's got a tank, Calgary's got a tank, we could debate for hours the merits of the type of equipment that police departments choose to spend money on. We can debate where that funding comes from. If the UCP had a problem with that, they could have just changed the rules. They could have just said, you know what? We believe in victim services. So we're going to say 70% across the board. 70% of all photo radar fines are going to go towards victim services now. 20%, they're going to go to community policing and early interventions. We're going to give up our provincial share because we believe so strongly in this, and we don't want to see it be a cash cow. We want to try to do preventative stuff, and we want to make sure that we're supporting the victims of crime after they've been the victims of crime. They could have very easily done that. They could have put forward legislation. They could have made regulatory changes to accomplish all of that, but they didn't, because that's not what it was about. It was about scoring cheap points with the people who have to pay out of pocket for bad driving habits. And as we saw in our conversation with lawyer Mark McCourt, I know there were some people who had some issues with having a lawyer on the show, but we have lots of lawyers on the show. As we saw in that conversation, the benefits that the UCP is touting in regards to the changes to no-fault insurance aren't going to benefit the average good driver. The people who are going to see the savings are the ones who are paying $4,500, $5,500 a year because they're terrible drivers. So again, we see this pattern of the UCP going, hey, there are these people who are getting penalties for not following the rules that the rest of us do, but they shouldn't have to have those penalties because we like voters. And instead of that being questioned, instead of that being the debate, and instead of the questions about the lack of funding, that it is a $15 million hole for victim services is a huge hole. A $15 million hole for the province of Alberta, given that this is the same province of Alberta that spent $100 million on Tylenol. I got a real hard time swallowing the notion that $15 million is going to be a hit for the province too, as Mr. Dreeshen claims there. But it's all about the cash cow, right? It's not as if the province has recently introduced programs that are specifically designed to raise funds regardless of a person's behavior. It's not as if they introduced I don't know, I'm just spitballing here, a $200 a year fee that's going to be levied on people who purchase electric vehicles? Oh, wait, yes, it is. That's exactly what they literally just did. So let's be clear. The UCP doesn't have a problem with cash cows. They like their cash cows. The cash cows that they don't like are the ones that maybe piss off their voters. But if we piss off somebody who's buying an EV, they probably weren't going to vote for us in the first place. And speaking of environmental issues, moving on from there, we got to talk about, we're going to go back in time for a second, all the way back to August 3rd, 2023, when Danielle Smith announced her pause inexplicably on the development of renewable power in the province of Alberta. Many people remember last year, right at the beginning of August, Danielle Smith announced that she was putting a moratorium on any new development of power in the province of Alberta that was wind or solar. And there were a lot of different reasons that were cited. We have to protect the pristine landscapes. We have to protect the pristine viewscapes. We really have to make sure that if somebody's put in a wind turbine, oh gosh, that could leave some concrete behind. So we got to make sure that we have funding to deal with the leftover concrete, I guess. And instead of just saying you have to set aside enough money to get rid of the concrete, they said we're going to put a 7-month moratorium on renewables. Now, the justifications above and beyond the reasons why were, let's go with fluid, because Smith initially said that the Alberta Electric System Operator, or AESO, and the Alberta Utilities Commission asked for the pause. They said, "Oh, we're so overwhelmed. We need the pause to get ourselves sorted out. It's just so overwhelming." And that was not true. And the wild part about that claim was, at the same time that Danielle Smith made that claim at the press conference, she also released 2 letters, one from the AASO and one from the AUC, where they both said, "Thanks for letting us know about your decision to do a pause." Neither of the letters said, "We would like a pause, please." They were just saying, "Thanks for the heads up." Then Smith said that it was actually, it was the rural municipalities of Alberta. They wanted the pause. And then the rural municipalities said, "Nope, we didn't. We didn't ask for a pause. We didn't do that. We share some of your concerns about the agricultural land and the pristine landscapes, but we didn't ask for a pause. Please don't put this on us." And it's since come out in a very well-written story from the Narwhal that the AASO chair, the AASO's CEO, so many letters, was pressured by the board chair, appointed by the government, to just support whatever the minister wanted. So the AASO board chair said, "I don't think this pause is a very good idea." I'm paraphrasing a little. And the boards came back and said, "Yeah, it's a real nice job you got there. It'd be a shame something happened to it." So this whole renewables pause has been an unmitigated dumpster fire since day one. And we still don't know. I mean, we know, but we don't have proof that this was purely an ideological move by Danielle Smith to try to make room for more natural gas power generation, is the speculation. But there's been no concrete reason provided why this was necessary. Well, the rules finally dropped in a just over 50-page document. The province of Alberta finally said, "Okay, so here's the rules, here's the goes and no-goes." And they initially didn't release a map, but then they finally released the map. And it's like they said, "Okay, where are all the good places near people that this sort of power generation would be the best place to put? Where would be, because if you build a big wind or solar farm somewhere, then you have to be able to get the power from that wind or solar farm to the peoples. So building those wind and solar farms closer to major rural area or urban areas makes more sense." But they blacked out all of the major living areas in the province of Alberta. And where it gets really wild is when you take a look at southern Alberta and you go, hey, where's all the places that the wind is at reliably? Southern Alberta, cough. Those are all blacked out now too. So the province went well out of their way to manufacture a series of regulations to say, we're going to make it so hard for anybody to do any sort of renewable energy generation in the province of Alberta because we just love our oil and gas daddies so much. That's what we're going to do. Moving on from there. We weren't sure if we were going to be able to use this the first time around, but it reared its head. Roar. The paper tiger that is the Alberta Sovereignty Act. Finally. Ferocious looking beast that it is. Danielle Smith finally deployed it. She said to the feds, oh, I'm going to Sovereignty Act you so hard. And it comes in response to the federal emissions cap. So, by way of background, the federal emissions cap, the final draft of the emissions cap was published roughly last month, month and a half ago. And it requires that oil and gas emissions levels, industry emissions levels, to be clear, we're talking about industrial emissions levels. They have to drop by the equivalent of 35% below 2019 levels by 2030 to 2032. So the industry, oil and gas industry, has roughly 6 to 8 years to bring their emissions 35% below where they were in 2019. Now, industry has come out and said that they'll be able to do that and still increase production. The federal government has come out and said they'll be able to do that and still increase production. But the province of Alberta has said, yeah, but we won't be able to do as much production as we might be able to. So you're mean. And Danielle Smith deployed the Sovereignty Act. It's ferocious. And there's some ideas that were put forward. So for anybody who's unfamiliar with how the Sovereignty Act ultimately was landed on, is the Sovereignty Act, somebody goes, oh, I'm going to Sovereignty Act you, and then the legislature debates a motion put forward by that person, and then they talk about, okay, well, how would be the best way to do those things without breaking any laws? And some of the ideas that Danielle Smith have put forward are not those things. There's going to be some legal stuffs that are definitely involved, because the motion's proposed to deal with the emissions cap, which again Danielle Smith insists on calling a productions cap, even though it's not. They restrict Alberta entities from enforcing the federal cap. So any provincial body that would be responsible for emissions regulations, like, I don't know, the AER or anything like that, they're not allowed to enforce the federal cap, which might be reasonable because by many standards, they don't even enforce the current regulations on damage to the environment by oil and gas and leaking things into waters of First Nations people in Northern Alberta, or dealing with orphan wells or any of those abandoned wells or anything like that. So it's probably not a huge ask to say, hey, here's one more thing to not do. Defines all Alberta oil and gas facilities as essential infrastructure. Now, this harkens back to Jason Kenney's days, where he put forth the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act, even though they're already a part of that. So, okay, moving on. Restricting access to oil and gas facilities to only those licensed by the province, which is interesting, because what that means is, in order to work at an oil and gas facility, to visit an oil and gas facility, you would have to have a license by the province, which means if you're bringing anybody in from outside of the province to deal with, I don't know, some kind of critical repair or something, boy, I sure hope the licensing office is open, because if it's not, you're going to have some very real problems. This is, of course, an attempt to say, if you send federal inspectors to our Alberta critical infrastructure facilities, we're not going to let you on because we're not going to give you a license. withholding data related to emissions, and they're going to call it proprietary information. So the claim that the Alberta government is making is that all emissions data now belongs to the province of Alberta. And it's the responsibility of oil and gas companies to provide that data to the province of Alberta, and then the province of Alberta will decide what to give to the feds. Again, most of this is not going to stand up in court, but this is what we're doing now, apparently. And Danielle Smith, the free market, capitalist, libertarian, has said that she, in effect, wants to nationalize the oil and gas industry to some degree, provincialize it. She wants to sell Alberta oil. So instead of the example that she used was, instead of accepting royalties, the cash that Albertans get for allowing oil and gas companies to take the oil and gas out of the ground, instead of accepting cash for that, what if we just accepted barrels of oil and then sold that oil ourselves? Then we would be part owners, even though we already are. It's very confusing. And then the feds wouldn't be able to do anything, even though, again, we have these things called courts. But she decided to have a press conference. She was going to have a little presser, and she was going to announce all of this. And there's going to be a press conference all about standing up. The federal government, they need to stay in their jurisdiction. We're going to have our jurisdiction. Everybody keep your own jurisdictions in your own pants. And that's the plan. But it went a little sideways, because the conversation very, very quickly shifted to the threats that were made by the Donald Trump. And the press conference very quickly went off the rails in a very, 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 very big way. To start with, almost nobody talked about the Sovereignty Act stuff, but what they did want to talk about is the Trump tariffs. We have some clips.
A question on jurisdiction when it comes to federal versus provincial. And I'm looking at your statement yesterday on Border Patrol. You're talking about Alberta will be acting urgently and decisively to patrol our own shared border with Montana. Now, international borders are a federal responsibility. Could you explain how Alberta would get involved in that?
Well, there's a couple things that we're contemplating. First of all, as you know, we promised in the last election, so well before the current crisis, that we were going to establish specialized sheriff units. So we have a specialized scan team. Those are shutting down drug houses. We've got a specialized team that is doing fugitive apprehension. We just had a major success in executing 1,000 warrants in conjunction with the RCMP and the EPS in Northern Alberta, where we've opened a second fugitive apprehension team in Southern Alberta. And we've been talking about having a special border patrol as well as a fentanyl apprehension team. And so I would imagine it would work very much the same way that our fugitive apprehension team has, that we would put resources together and work with our counterparts to make sure that if we're seeing any illegal activity happening, either coming into Canada or going on away from Canada into the United States, that we have the ability to apprehend those individuals and make sure that they see justice. I think that's what Albertans expect. I think it's what our American counterparts expect, and I think it's just good policy.
I'm sorry, now how does that work? Because it's a federal jurisdiction, the border. The RCMP is involved, you've got the Border Patrol, the federal agents. How does Alberta fit into that on a very basic sense? Do you have then sheriffs or somebody else at the border as well, checking people as they come across?
Well, I think what we discovered when the presidential permit for the Keystone XL pipeline was canceled from the White House, that the federal jurisdiction over the border is actually quite narrow. There's a lot of land mass right after you cross the border that we're responsible for. We're responsible for policing. We're responsible for administration of justice. The RCMP is one of the entities that we have contracted to provide services in rural Alberta. Our sheriffs are another entity we've contracted to provide services in rural Alberta. And so those, I think it's incumbent upon us to work with our federal counterparts, our border security, the Montana officials to make sure that we're sharing information and that we're making sure that we're apprehending people who mean to do us harm.
From tariffs to sheriffs. we you know what, we have not played very much here at the breakdown with the AI photo generation stuffs, but we well, a little fun this week because we did go in the province of Alberta from tariffs to sheriffs. And there's a lot in that clip. There's so much more coming, for the record, but there's a lot in that clip that's a boatload of fun because Danielle Smith says, oh, as it turns out, a border is just the edge of a thing. There's all of this other stuff inside of it that nobody knew about before then. We have all of this jurisdiction as a province for the stuff that the borders. And that's where we'll enforce our jurisdiction over the border somehow. I don't fully get it, but it just got better from there because it didn't take very long for Danielle Smith to defend a provincial presence, provincial decision making at the border in probably one of the most unexpected ways.
Just to get more clarity, you're talking about actually having these sheriffs on the actual border or in and around in the rural areas near the border. And I'm wondering how much money you're willing to invest in something that is very clearly federal jurisdiction, international border.
I mean, I think we all watched what happened at Coutts. Who do you think was responsible for the policing of what happened at Coutts? That was under our jurisdiction. The RCMP are on contract to us. It was our obligation to make sure that that border got cleared. And so I don't think it's unusual to have the Alberta government take an interest through our various law enforcement mechanisms to make sure that we're addressing the illegal flows of whether it's people or drugs across the border. So I would say that this is very normal policing activity to share information, share intelligence, and then if we have identified a serious problem, to work together collaboratively on both.
I gotta say, watching the reaction to that clip, particularly by, I don't know, one of the people who is found to be one of the facilitators. Some people might say ringleaders of the Coutts blockade. Hearing Danielle Smith saying, "Oh, Coutts was so bad, so out of control. Province had to step in, totally under jurisdiction." That was. I worry for the day when he goes to jail and I'll no longer be able to say the name Marco Van Hogenbos. But watching Marco's reaction was really quite telling because Danielle Smith threw a lot of people who thought she supported them under the semi-trailer. And it's not like they didn't have good reason to believe that Danielle Smith believed in Coutts. She believed in what was happening at Coutts because at the same time that Coutts was going on, Danielle Smith was doing her little radio or television program with the Western Standard, who now receive government funding in the form of advertising dollars. More on that later. And she wasn't just the only person who was on that program. It was hosted by her chief propaganda. I mean, he does something. Mr. McAllister is now, he was hosting that program, and he's now the host of the Danielle Smith Propaganda Hour, Alberta Update, I think it's called. And then her other pundit that she shared that space with is now her right-hand man, Rob Anderson. It's not like they publicly, on the record, at the time of Coutts, espoused thoughts on Coutts that might lead the Marco Van Hogen bosses of the world to think that maybe she had their back. And I don't know, she wanted, let's say, a win at Coutts.
Frankly, I'm surprised that you haven't, or maybe both of you, saddled up and and ridden down to see what's going on. It's been quite the freedom convoy in Coutts as well.
Yeah, it has, and I think it's a beautiful thing. I just think that I think the whole Freedom Convoy, and that would include what's going on at Coutts and in capitals around the country right now, and now around the world, as people are copying Canada of all things, is one of the most important I would say, events, certainly in recent Canadian history.
And I think this is the reason why we want to see this win. We want to see it win so that they don't end up rolling out the full plan. And we want to see it win at Coutts so that Jason Kenney, Scott Moe together become the first premiers to turn it around at the provincial level.
So you see, I can't imagine where Marco and co would have gotten the idea that Danielle Smith was a huge supporter of Coutts and wanted to see a win there. It's all so confusing, but there's more, because all of this conversation about the border came around again because Donald Trump was elected president and announced that there was going to be a 25% tariff on all goods coming from Canada. Now, there's been a lot of confusion. A lot of people who maybe, whoa, how does that work? So to be clear, a tariff is something that the country that's receiving the goods charges on the goods on their end. So let's say that Alberta was selling widgets to Montana, and we were selling those widgets for $1. We would ship those widgets to the border, which is the edge of the things. As it turns out, there's a great deal inside of the things, but we would send it to the border. It crosses the border. As soon as it crosses the border, the U.S. government says, okay, now, guy who bought this, we're charging you 25% extra. So now you not only have to pay the good Canadians the dollar for their widgets, you also got to pay us 25%. So a tariff is a price increase on something that's coming from outside of the country. Now, a lot of people will go, why would Donald Trump want to charge tariffs on stuff that would make things more expensive for his own American citizens? And they're not wrong in the short term, but there's an argument to be made that in the long term, for many of these products, that 25% increase in cost would actually stimulate the internal economy of the United States. It would cause more products to be made inside of the United States. And as Donald Trump himself has said, that 25% tariffs on everything coming in from Canada and Mexico and an additional 10% on anything coming from China would raise a lot of money for the federal government to do things with. So that's why the Donald has said that he wants to do the tariffs. He wants to stimulate the U.S. economy, and he wants to raise a boatload of money so that he can buy golden toilets or something, I guess. But that's why all of the conversation shifted from the very scary Sovereignty Act to the border. And it got weird because the position that Danielle Smith seemed to take was all of the Donald's concerns are very, very valid. The position that Justice Minister Mickey Amory took as he got down off of his very big boy stool was different.
Premier, you've just mentioned the flow of illegal goods across the border here. Do you have any data as to how much of these goods we're seeing across the Alberta-Montana border?
Well, we know it's a problem. We know that the vast majority of the illegal handguns and a large number of drugs and other paraphernalia are coming through the U.S. border. Once again, as the Premier said, we have our interests are aligned in making sure that we work together as good neighbors to quell these the illegal transport of guns and drugs across the border. We're going to do everything that we can to make sure that doesn't happen, and we'll continue to put the resources that we need to put forward to address those concerns. So that is in the interest of Albertans, it's in the interest of Canadians, and it's in the interest of our American neighbors. So all of
Now, let's be clear. When Mickey Amory is talking about the guns at the border, he's not talking about guns coming from Canada and going to the United States, because you see, the United States has all of the guns. And so when we're talking about guns that are used illegally in crimes here in Canada, they tend to be guns that have been imported across the border to Canada from the United States. So the problem is that the Americans are sending us the bad stuff, which was actually accurate. Mickey got it right. So good job, Mickey. Well done. But Smith's bargaining tactics seem to be a little bit different because while Mickey Amory is saying, yeah, we got a problem at the border because we got the drugs and the guns and they keep coming up here and it's causing all of these problems, Danielle Smith wanted to go as quickly as she possibly could to making sure that Donald knows that he can play the race card.
We have also addressed the concerns that the federal government is bringing in too many people from too many different streams in a way that has been that is unsustainable for us to support. It's part of the reason why we've asked them to get a handle on the immigration flows. I would say that one of the stats that I've heard in the last short while over the last couple of days is that there's 4.9 million temporary work permits that are coming to an end. And I asked the Prime Minister, what is his plan for dealing with those number of individuals when they no longer have a legal right to work here? If I was the Americans, I'd be looking at that saying, what are you going to do about it? And so I want to see a plan around that because I think Canadians and Albertans in particular are.
Donald, you know all those bad things that you're really, really worried about? Yeah, totally agree. They're super, super bad. But also, did you know that we've got 4.9 million temporary workers in Canada and their work permits are going to expire soon? You should probably insert yourself into Canada's internal domestic policy to make sure that they're not just going to run across your border and cause you problems. You can tell them Danny sent you. It's mind-blowing that the tactic that somebody would take with somebody like Donald Trump, who's made it very clear he doesn't like people who are particularly weak. He enjoys the art of the deal. He enjoys the negotiation. He likes to win. He likes the feeling that he's beaten someone. And when someone comes up and says, please, sir, may I lick the other boot too? He's not impressed by that. And in case you were thinking, maybe that's a one-off, maybe Danny was just riffing. She was trying to make sure that the federal government knew that there's 4.9 million temporary work permits in place because the federal government being the ones who issued them wouldn't know, I guess. She also did some interviews.
Well, look, let's stop the leaky border first. Let's stop the illegal migration first. Let's stop the fentanyl first. Let's meet our NATO commitment first, and let's see where we get with the Americans. I think that the U.S. has legitimate issues that they have raised with us, and we've got to address those legitimate issues. I don't think that we can say, yeah, but, because quite frankly, the American economy is the strongest in the world. They can produce a lot of what they need to consume. We are very reliant on them, and they are in the position of being able to dictate terms. And so I suppose we could punish ourselves with tariffs, but I would say, why don't we take the approach of trying to figure out how to solve the things that are the trade irritants to them?
Because in any negotiation, the way that you want to approach it is you want to say, hey, you know what? We've got some things that we disagree on. We've got some things that we've got to find a common ground on. But what I want you to know right out of the get-go is you have all of the cards. I know that. You know that. You have all of the power. I know that. And you know that. I need to do whatever you want. And I want you to know I'm willing to do whatever you want. That's how you stand up for Alberta. And that's how you stand up for Canada, I guess. Strong negotiations. We're seeing strong. This is the strength that's going to protect the border as well, I guess. Moving on from there, we got another update on everybody's favorite topic, the Tylenauts. So it turns out that there's as always, there's more to the story with the Tylenol. This week, Adrienne LaGrange said inside of the legislature, she was asked a question and she answered it. And she said, yes, we paid all the money up front to Atabay Pharmaceuticals, the importers of the Tylenol, that was suboptimal in just about every way, and that we couldn't sell to other provinces because of how suboptimal it was. It was very, very bad. But it was worth it, totally worth it. And we paid for it all up front. And yes, even though more than half of the product half of the money that we gave Atabey has yet to actually result in us getting, what's the word I'm looking for? Anything. $49 million, sorry. $49 million is sitting in Atabey's bank accounts. I want to say this again to make it really clear. $49 million of taxpayers' money is sitting in Atabey's bank accounts collecting interest, not for the taxpayer. No. For Atabey. We've gotten nothing for that money. But they're collecting a significant amount of interest on effectively $50 million. It might not be $50 million yet, but because they're collecting interest on taxpayers' money, it probably will be soon. She still defends the deal as being necessary at the time. But where it gets really, really wild is, according to the story that was done by Matthew Black, they've acknowledged that there are no product lines that exist right now. Sorry, that there are no product lines that exist right now that Atabey can provide Alberta Health Services that Alberta Health Services would need. So that $49 million, and I'm sorry, I screwed up my whole rant. I apologize. The money did not go to Atabey. It went to MH Care, the Skybox people. So it's not apparently Atabey that's collecting the interest on that money. It may very well be MH Care. But yeah, so that's great. That's the whole thing. They're just sitting on our money, collecting interest on it. We have received nothing for that upwards of $50 million worth of taxpayers' money, and somebody's using it to make money on investments, and Alberta taxpayers aren't getting anything for that. So cool. So this is why I said at the beginning of the show, when you have Devin Dreeshen complaining about the $15 million hole that the photo radar is going to blow in the provincial budget, you're letting them keep almost $50 million of money for nothing. I don't think that $15 million that the province is going to lose from photo radar is that big of a deal. Moving on from there, we only got a couple of stories left, and we'll open it up to the open mic if anybody wants to weigh in. And if nobody does, that's okay too. And hopefully we'll be back to our regular time next week for anybody who's just tuning in the last 10 minutes going, wait, what? Yeah, moving on from there. We got to talk about... See, here's the thing. One of the things that people have said over the last little while is, hey, what if the UCP doesn't stop with trans health issues? What if they decide to move on to other things? What if with the hospitals and the profitizing of the hospitals? What if the, like in Lacrate, where they're taking the hospital away from Alberta Health Services and they're moving it to Covenant? What if that does translate into diminished access to abortion care? What if they do that? Should we be mindful of that? Oh no, they'll stop with the trans stuff. It turns out they have not stopped with the trans stuff, because the province recently announced that they are contemplating major changes to how the province of Alberta provides medical assistance in dying. Now, this is a fraught issue for sure. I want to be very clear about that. And it is an emotionally charged issue for sure. Also want to be very clear about that. That being said, when we are talking about personal choices, people exercising their personal autonomy over their own bodies, this is something that Danielle Smith rode to government in. So regardless on where you stand on the MAID program, we have already crossed the bridge into hypocrisy land. That out of the way. As with any program, there are always going to be improvements to be made. But it is fairly safe to say giving family members veto over whether or not somebody gets to access MAID is not one of those improvements. But that's exactly one of the things that the province is looking at. And this gets to be really complicated really, really quickly, because if you're somebody who's dealing with, let's say, a terminal illness, and you are at the end stage of that terminal illness, and your entire existence is defined either by pain or being so medicated that you can't get out of bed anymore, and you say, you know what? I had a great run. This is not how I want to end it. I would like to access the MAID, please. And you've got that one super religious family member who believes that MAID is suicide. And because it's suicide, you're going to go to hell if you access this program. And I don't want that for you. And because I have my own set of religious beliefs that are perfectly appropriate for myself, I'm now going to go to the provincial government and say, no, I don't think that he should be accessing MAID. This is exactly what the province is looking at entertaining. And when we take a look at the people who are making these decisions, their track record makes it pretty clear the direction that they would likely go. They've already said it out loud. People like Dan D. Williams believe that medical assistance in dying is not, it shouldn't be an option. And just like they did with the questions of gender affirming care, they have latched on to the most upsetting and polarizing elements of the conversation. And they're more than happy to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So people need to start realizing that when the UCP starts to chip away at the personal freedoms, the charter rights and freedoms that exist or supposed to exist for every Canadian, it never is just one and I'm good. It's always more, because at its core, it's about control. It's about asserting my beliefs over your beliefs. It's about asserting my values over your values. And if my values contradict with the charter, then I guess you can just take me to court up until I invoke the notwithstanding clause. They're not going to stop. And we saw that play out tragically this week when it came to the passing of the multiple anti-science, anti-medicine, anti-parental choice bills, where the UCP passed their anti-trans legislation. All of the legislation that Danielle Smith has been talking about for the last year, all of the legislation that has been condemned universally by every expert body that exists in the province of Alberta and the country of Canada that has weighed in on the conversation. Nobody has said, no credible organization has said that these policies are good, that they're evidence-based. The very best that the UCP and the supporters of these policies have been able to muster is a couple of badly written, pseudoscientific, largely debunked papers that they've twisted out of context to accomplish their goals. And again, the fact that they've been willing to do this with a percentage of the population that is not only incredibly small, but also incredibly vulnerable. If you're willing to punch down on trans kids, knowing that this sort of legislation increases the risk of suicide by up to 72%, if you're willing to do that to those people, you should not believe for 1 second that they won't do it to anybody else. That's just the reality. And this is why the MAID conversation gets to be so important. Now, it didn't take long at all, thank goodness, before Egal and Stepping Stone Egal and Skipping Stone, stepped up. See what I did there? And immediately issued their legal response. So Egal Canada, Skipping Stone, and several families in Alberta represented by lawyers from McCarthy, Totoro, LLP, and Egal have initiated litigation against the government of Alberta challenging the constitutionality of Bill 26, which denies medically necessary care from being provided to gender-diverse youth in the province. Bill 26 received royal assent and became law on December 5th, 2024. The actions of the government of Alberta are unprecedented in this country. No government in Canada has ever enacted legislation prohibiting essential and life-saving gender-affirming healthcare. In the litigation, Egal, Skipping Stone, and Alberta families assert that Bill 26 violates the charter rights of gender-diverse young people in Alberta, specifically their Section 7 right to security of the person, their Section 12 right to be free from cruel and unusual punishment, and their Section 15 right to equality. It goes on. With the passage of this legislation, the government of Alberta has deliberately disregarded expert guidance and evidence, as well as the voices of Alberta families, and introduced policies that use fear and disinformation to target a small and vulnerable part of the community, 2S LGBTQI young people. And it's true. There's no getting around that. We've done the FOIP to see who they consulted with. They knew going in that if they did any consultation with the physicians, the psychologists, the pediatricians, the experts, that all of them were going to say, this is a big thing that you're going to do very, very badly, and kids are going to die because of it. They still did it. So the legal challenge is going forward. And this brings us to the last little bit of housekeeping that we need to do here tonight. We put it up on our Patreon earlier today, but I want to, with the approval of everybody else involved in tonight's show, I want to read the whole thing because it's important. There's a reason why I'm wearing this shirt today, because it's very, very easy to say, oh, I think that's a bad thing. It's harder still to publicly condemn a bad thing. And it is critically important to, when necessary, put your money where your mouth is. So, as longstanding supporters of our show will know, especially the Patreon supporters, we've made it a bit of a holiday tradition to send out a small swag package, swag being sometimes it's stickers, we've done masks, we've done t-shirts, to all of our supporters during the holiday season. This swag and the postage to send everything out is part of a small fund that we set aside all year. This year, we're doing something a little different. With the Canada Post strike still ongoing, getting out holiday cards gets a lot more complex really quickly. And then there's the whole human rights thing. In Alberta, the UCP government is actively rolling back human rights. While the most highly publicized example of this is their anti-science, anti-medicine-based attacks on trans folk, it's important to emphasize that the attacks on individual autonomy are far more reaching than that. The UCP is expanding the role of faith-based hospitals in the province. They've already flipped the crate from AHS to Covenant, and they've been very clear that they're looking at more. This has a direct impact on the ability of women to access evidence-based reproductive health care, as religious institutions do not offer many services. The UCP has also made it clear that they will be introducing forced treatment for addictions, despite the significant evidence showing that forced treatment provides significantly higher harms than a spectrum of treatment options. This will cost Albertans lives. Most recently, the UCP have announced that they're conducting a review of the MAID program, potentially with an eye to prevent an individual from accessing MAID if they have family members who disagree with that decision for situation or even moral reasons. Danielle Smith has also demonstrated time and time again that she will not bow to public pressure. That means now, more than ever, Albertans are reliant on the courts to put a stop to these attacks on individual rights. For these reasons and more, the team at The Breakdown has decided that we need to put our money where our mouths are. This year, instead of swag and postage, we're putting that fund to where it will hopefully do some real good and donating $500 to the Skipping Stone Legal Defense Fund. We appreciate that some of our supporters may not support this decision because of their personal stance on trans issues. We disagree with you nonetheless. We would encourage everybody to view this through the lens that the UCP is undeniably attacking individual rights, and stopping them early is the best way to stopping them, period. We also acknowledge that we may lose some supporters over this. We're all okay with that. And to Danielle Smith and the UCP, we want to wish you a very sincere, happy holidays, and you can all go fuck yourselves. Normally, this is the part where we do the plug, but the only plug that we're going to do tonight is a plug for, it'll be in the show notes. We're going to include the link for the donations to the legal fund, because the only place that the UCP have been stopped since Danielle Smith came to power has been in the courts. It's the only place that they're going to be stopped. And so we are happy to throw our support behind the legal challenge to this draconian legislation. And we would encourage all of our listeners to consider doing the same. Please check the show notes. All of that being said, we got a couple of people in the queue. So I'm going to open it up to the floor real quick. And we'll see what we see. Get started with longtime friend of the show, Ziad. And hopefully I've pushed the buttons in the right way. Ziad, how are you doing tonight, sir?
Fine, thanks, Nate.
Good.
I'm juggling a little bit because I had to mute my YouTube, which I was watching while I was commenting there. So I get to comment live now.
There you go. It's easier.
I wanted to talk about the MH Care Atta Bay imported children's medications.
Yeah.
I know a little bit of thing about it.
Do you?
And yeah, while most people noticed Matthew Black's excellent reporting from the Edmonton Journal and his FOIP that got 1,200 pages of documents.
Yep.
A lot of people missed Lisa Johnson's reporting the same day. She's a Canadian press writer, and she was reported in Global and CTV and other places. So the main thing that happened in the Lisa Johnson coverage is that she spoke to AHS directly, and AHS confirmed the initial payment of $70 million was made to MH Care, and that the remaining balance is with MH Care. And there's MH Care that has to do the Health Canada approvals work. So I've known this since January 2023. It officially came out in a Blue Cross warning to pharmacists about this product and its wrong concentration, that MH Care was the importer. But LaGrange and Smith are still lying and saying it's Atta Bay, and they're still hiding MH Care Medical's role or responsibility in this. If you look at Matthew Black's article, he even quotes LaGrange, who said in the legislature that the money went to Atta Bay and it's Atta Bay that holds the balance. So, yeah, I don't know, lying inside the legislature, lying outside the legislature.
I think you're allowed to do that. It's like name calling.
I'm sorry?
I think it's like you're allowed to do that. It's like name calling. Like, I know that one of the threats that often gets made is say that outside of the legislature, because you can effectively slander somebody or libel or defame somebody inside of the legislature. But as soon as you step outside of the legislature, now you're getting yourself into trouble. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some sort of rule that says, yeah, no, you can totally lie.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking about the defamation risk to LaGrange. I was just saying that when a minister is asked a question in question period and they lie in their answer, that's a different kind of misconduct, right? And the lies that Smith and LaGrange are doing now are similar to the lies that Smith and Copping made in December 2022 and on. And for that reason, the $80 million boondoggle, which I called right away was going to be a zero product, expensive mess. Now this effort to use the remaining 49.4 is also going to be a deliver no product, lots of cover up boondoggle. And we'll spend millions more trying to use this 49.4 million. So I'm not sure how much time you have, but I made some notes on Lisa Johnson's article and compared to Matthew Black's, and they're both great reporters. They just ask different people, and if you don't mind, I'll take a minute or two, maybe a couple of minutes to point out some stuff.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So, yeah, in Matthew Black's article, he noted that in the FOIP documents he got, that last year, AHS pharmacy and procurement staff were comparing shortages at the time. And those shortages at the time were amoxicillin oral suspension, the antibiotic, acetaminophen IV infusion, ASE suppositories, and ketamine. So, one thing is I looked at it at Adabey's offerings, and they don't offer pure amoxicillin. It's cut with another product. They already have an acetaminophen IV infusion product, which is 100 milligrams per 100 milliliters of volume. It comes in a bottle that you would dip a syringe into. They don't make any suppositories, and they don't make any ketamine. But what I'm looking at from that is, AHS is looking at shortages, which are generally short term, and you can't import from Turkey a product that the Turkish manufacturer themselves don't make in time to clear your storage within Alberta. So Smith likes to blame Health Canada, but you're doing a product development. You are introducing a new product in a Turkish factory to new packaging, new labeling, and in some cases a whole new way of delivering the medication, a suppository. Now, in Lisa Johnson's reporting, Smith told her that the holdup is with Health Canada, which would have to approve a new suite of imports for the province to get its money's worth. And she said, we're waiting for Health Canada to work with AHS to identify the products, get the formulations, approve it so that we're able to execute on it. Those things take time. So it doesn't work that way. Like Health Canada doesn't sit with AHS and go, what are your shortages? Oh, you're short on this, this, and this? Okay, fine, we'll start the approval process on them. No, an importer has to make a submission to Health Canada and meet all of the requirements. The other thing Smith lied about is she said they delivered a portion and then the supply chains were restored and we didn't need to fulfill it with the 2 products we'd initially ordered. So we have a credit on file with Adabey. So now Smith is trying to pretend that the $70 million paid to MH Care was for a whole suite of products. Only the first 2 were the acetaminophen and the ibuprofen, and the rest of the stuff they've been trying to buy, Health Canada is the problem. It doesn't work that way.
No.
An importer has to make a submission. And to this day, Adabey does not have any products approved by Health Canada or any raw ingredient, active pharmaceutical ingredient. So why would you pay $70 million for a Turkish factory to ship goods to you for import into your country if they don't have any products allowed for sale here by Health Canada? Now, Health Canada is taking a different tactic than they did in December and January of 2022 and 2023. Before, they were answering reporters' questions of when Alberta submitted and when they approved and basically calling out Alberta for lying about it. This time, they're not doing that. They're just saying they can't comment on submissions until they're added to the public list of submissions under review. So one, it's a different Health Canada strategy of not having to rebut Alberta's lies. It was just like, go to the website. And I went to the website and there's no products there submitted. And it's kind of stupid because GOA knew from spring 2023 that the gravy train, cash cow, I'm wearing an apron as I say this, had run out on the acetaminophen and the ibuprofen, and that they'd have to look at other products. So why, since the early part of 2023 to now, do we not have a single application submission made to Health Canada to approve any other product? Somebody in the comments asked, is MHK our friend Skybox Sam's company? And yes, it is.
Sure is.
And I think that's the reason why Smith and her health minister du jour, whether it's Copping or LaGrange, lie about MHCare's involvement. This is a bad deal. I suspect corruption in it, and they're just accepting what I believe are bribes to cabinet ministers from MHCare with skybox seats is a part of covering up MHCare's involvement.
I mean, here's my thing with it, because like I'm no business person. That's pretty clear. But the two pieces to me that I just want to sort of flesh out. I don't really care all that much. I mean, I know in the Lisa Johnson article, I have it in front of me now. I know in the Lisa Johnson article, it says that AHS said the $70 million prepayment went to Edmonton-based pharma medical supplier MHCare Medical. We don't know whether or not MHCare passed the full payment on to Atabey or whether they kept it themselves. And honestly, I don't know that I care too much who has the money, because at the end of the day, somebody is still sitting on pallets of Alberta taxpayers' money and making interest on that. And that's the fact that is a situation that Danielle Smith and the UCP allow to persist is, to me, a complete abdication of their responsibility and their fiduciary duty to taxpayers. But like the other thing is, just off the top of my head, I don't know how much Atabey as a company is worth, but I don't know why Danielle Smith hasn't said to Atabey, hey, we'll take stock. Like, we'll just invest in you. You can keep the $49 million. I don't know why I keep saying billion tonight. $49 million, and just give us $49 million worth of stock. We'll call it a day. Like, at least that way, Alberta taxpayers would be getting dividends of some kind. But instead, we're just letting the money sit in somebody else's bank account and earn them money instead of, I don't know, paying for schools or hospitals or teachers or any of those things.
So two things that if you're done, I'll comment on those.
Yeah, go ahead.
So one is the interest being accrued, I'm assuming, is to the benefit of Alberta. So the 49 million, if it's getting, 100,000 in interest or 500,000 in interest, those would be applied to our purchase. So I'm not too concerned about that. Holding stock in the Turkish company, so it is a small family, well, not small, but a mid-sized family-held business, started by Suna Atabey, who married an Oz, and one of their kids was Dr. Oz.
Yeah.
So, buying a Turkish company that's not publicly listed, you're relying on their financial statements to determine the value, and you can get burned very badly on that. At least if a stock is publicly listed on a reputable exchange with a reputable regulator, you have some protection that way. Yeah, it depends on the contract, and it also depends on, it's disturbing that the Alberta government keeps hiding the involvement of MHCare. Like, to this day, they're lying about it, because that tells me it's more of a corrupt reason MHCare is keeping the $49 million than a contractual reason. Because there must be some way of saying, okay, you're expecting to make a certain profit on the $49 million. You're not going to get that because we're not going to order from you anymore. So whatever, take $5-10 million profit, and we'll get the rest in cash. Because it's going to cost much more. Like, AHS and the GOA will spend a lot more to try and bring products in, and then they won't be used here either. Like, if you look at it, 13,700 of the 1.5 million bottles have ever been used. At least not even used, but distributed to pharmacies within AHS or distributed to London Drugs, and I don't think any other company. So, there was supposedly a global shortage. Health Canada approved around 4 million imports of medication during the winter of 2022. And this MHCare crap was supposed to be 1.5 million of it. But instead, Alberta ended up sucking product away from the rest of the country. Instead of 1.5 million coming in, at least taking care of Alberta, and according to Copping's dream, being exported to other provinces from Alberta, with only 13,000 usable out of 1.5 million units, actually screwed over the rest of Canada by not bringing in the amount that Alberta needed. Alberta had to draw from other provinces to meet its needs because the MHCare stuff was crap.
Can I give a little bit of context real quick? Because I was just doing some quick back of the napkin math as you were talking, because we're talking about such big numbers. And I think that it's important to I hope that the contract stipulates that any money held in trust, the interest would go towards the Albertans. I would hope that, and I'll tell you for the record, we have a FOIP pending to try to get the contract, and they want to charge us a not small amount of money by any stretch of the imagination for the records, unless we demonstrate that it's in the public interest. And my response was like, y'all held press conferences. I feel like it's in the public interest, and some other things as well. But to put some color on how much money we're talking about when it comes to interest, the Bank of Canada interest rates just dropped. So if I go with the lowest range of interest rates from the Bank of Canada right now, it's sitting at right around 3.8%. Now that drop happened between October and November. Prior to that, it was like 4.3%, which gets to be big numbers really, really quickly. But if we go with the lowest number of interest rate for Bank of Canada interest rates right now on the $49 million, we're talking about $1.862 million in interest a year. So we're talking about almost $2 million in interest a year that's being earned. And I think that when we talk about $2 million, it certainly behooves the provincial government to say, oh no, yeah, that's totally coming back to you, Alberta. Don't worry. And clearing that up, because depending on whose interpretation of things you read, it is an optimistic interpretation to say that it's Alberta that's getting the interest, but it's not a guarantee.
Yeah, Lagrange's exact words were that Atabey is earning interest on the money. And, there's already a lie there, because Atabey doesn't hold the money, MHCare is. And the other is, I don't think the contract contemplated an excess balance remaining with MHCare. So there might not be anything about who gets that interest.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. If you just look at the deal, the original deal, and then the things they're trying to do now, but the original deal, Health Canada hadn't approved a single product or raw ingredient from Atabey, despite the fact they've been making acetaminophen since the 1970s. So that tells you something. So what Alberta did is they got the CMOH to sign off an attestation and import it through a loophole, which Danielle Smith loves exploiting, a loophole called a public health urgent need. And that import then is only allowed in the province for that CMOH. And so that's why the stuff was only restricted to Alberta. So just look at those 5 million, which was supposed to come in 10 shipments of 500,000. As soon as that first shipment comes in, whether it's 500,000 or even 250,000, in a province the size of Alberta, your emergency for public need is over.
Yeah.
Like your first shipment ends the rationale you laid out to Health Canada to allow the exceptional import in the first place. So, actually it's kind of generous of Health Canada to allow this crap, 1.5 million bottles in. But they could have just said, the minute the first 250,000 arrives, your emergency is over.
Yeah. No, agreed. 100%.
Yeah. I'm just thinking that the Alberta government is going to waste more money beyond the 49 million on deposit, trying to make more product. And if you look at the end of Matthew Black's article, Smith told Post Media that the province is looking at ways to repurpose that medication before it goes bad. So that's the 1.5 million bottles in stock with 13 months of expiry. And then she also said, we have to figure out how to meet the rest of that order. But that first thing, which is repurpose that medication in-house already before it goes bad, politicians shouldn't be telling doctors what to do.
No.
And the doctors already went off-label with this. Like, obviously, kids don't like the taste, and people don't want the risk, whether they're nurses or pharmacists or people in the public, don't want the risk of the wrong concentration. So they want, so the label use of this product, age 2 to 11, taken orally by a spoon or a syringe, oral syringe, is not happening. So we already had AHS very stupidly go off-label and put this stuff in gastric feeding tubes for newborns in the NICU because the newborns are too small to taste it and spit it out, whereas kids 2 to 11 happily spit it out. And, AHS came back and said, our usage was appropriate. No, it wasn't, because if physicians go off-label a lot, and that's fine, but they do that in the best interest of the patient. There's something with the drug that has been proven in other applications that they're trying to provide that benefit to this patient. Or there's a shortage and they can't get the drug. But here there's lots of name brand acetaminophen that AHS already buys from multiple suppliers. So the only reason for this off-label use was political as opposed to in the best interest of the patient. And Smith is pushing for more of that. So, one risk is Alberta government and AHS will spend more than the $49 million on balance trying to make a new product happen. But the other is just the $21 million that was spent and is now sitting in inventory rotting. More people will expose to risk if Smith and LaGrange keep pushing AHS to find some other way of using it other than the label.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
so there's that. Oh, dear. Anything else you want to add there, Ziad? I got Tammy waiting in the wings here.
I'll be watching Health Canada's database for adverse drug reactions because AHS made an excuse why there was no parole acetaminophen in the drug reactions. What happened in hospitals to those newborns is an adverse drug reaction that has to be reported either by AHS or MHCare. And I made a Health Canada complaint about that about 2 weeks ago. So we'll see what happens with that. There's other aspects to the complaint that I'm not openly discussing, but we'll see what happens to that if parole pops up in the Health Canada database. It'll take about a month to find out. It'll be very interesting.
Well, please keep us in the loop on that.
Yeah, you bet.
All right. Thanks again, man.
Thanks for the time.
All right. We're going to, we got one other speaker that I want to make sure we make some space for tonight. And that is friend of the show, Tammy. And then we're going to shut it down. And that's the plan. Tammy, what's going on tonight?
Oh, so many things. Missed you guys doing the talking thing. I know you were sick. I'm glad you're feeling better.
Oh, yeah. Do not recommend whatever that was.
Yeah, I get that a lot. So I've got two things tonight. One of which is a Danielle Smith thing that I don't know whether you saw or not. So you know how she's ranting about wanting to keep the wrong people out of Alberta and the entire catering to Donald Trump crap?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if you saw it or not, and I don't know what paper it was because it was literally just something that had popped up, but it's from December 6th. There was an article in a paper, Alberta seeking to recruit foreign workers from United Arab
Emirates. Yep. I did see that.
Like, does she not get it?
Well, she's doing a whole trip.
One side of the mouth says one thing and the other side of the mouth says the other.
Yes.
I mean, but again, it's her catering to the oil and gas folk.
Yep.
That's what that is. So again, she is so fixated on oil and gas that she can't allow any other industry in Alberta. That is her thing. Oil and gas. Just oil and gas. Everything else, anything else can be screwed. And interestingly, and excuse my language for saying screwed, but
That's okay.
So the other thing that has my knickers in a twist, as my mother would say, is this entire thing of them trying to stop people from accessing MAID.
Mm-hmm.
So I get that right now, and this is always the thing, it's a slippery slope. So right now, they're saying family members can have this say about somebody else accessing MAID. But the slippery slope of that is that we know what Danielle does, right? She's done it with the kids that, sorry, my post-stroke mouth is not working again.
That's okay.
With the kids, I'm going to explain it really badly, and I'm really sorry. Kids that are born as one gender and
the trans youth.
Trans kids. Thank you. And that's a stroke thing. Is sometimes you have to explain it, and then your brain will go, "Oh, you're looking for that word."
Yep. I got you.
So it's the thing about the trans kids is at first it's the family is going to have the say. Except now it's not the family. It's the government. It's not about the kid, about mom and the doctor getting together and saying, yeah, okay, so, my kid feels like she's a woman and I'm okay with that. Or my kid has issues and we're going to basically put her on puberty blockers or put the kid on puberty blockers so that they can figure things out and that things will be easier when they're older. They're not saying mom and the doctor can do that anymore. They're saying we have the right to do that. So as someone who has had 2 strokes and cancer, I live with the knowledge that eventually I will probably have something else catastrophic happen in my health that I will want to choose to leave this earth before maybe my body wants to give it up. And everything, and I'm starting to cry because it's really personal to me. I have a kid with ADHD that is so bad, and she has other health issues that are so bad that she can't work. So I am basically supporting both of us. And I know because I'm a mom and because I think it would be better for her that with Danielle Smith going after our CPP, because we know what she'll treat if she does get Albertans CPP put into an APP. We know what she'll do with it. She'll treat it like free money. She won't treat it like it's Albertans' money that should be used for their retirement. She will look at it as it's free money for them to give to their buddies and use it willy-nilly. So I live with the constant knowledge that my retirement may in fact, in the end, rather than however many years of living and CPP, when I was on CPPD, they literally told me that, oh man, you must have been working a long time with a really high rate because we can tell based on what your CPPD gives you. It's basically top rate. So I know that when I retire, if Danielle Smith doesn't get my CPP, that the CPP plus what I've been able to put aside because my original RRSPs got eaten up after my strokes. Basically, I used it to live while I was getting onto CPP and AISH and everything else. So I know that what I will put away, because I'm putting away now that I'm working again, I know that that's not going to be that much, because basically I'm starting at zero not zero, now I've got about 16 grand set aside, but I'm starting at a much lower rate with much less time to accumulate, right? I've got about 15 grand put away. I'm 54 years old. I'm already planning, as long as something horrible doesn't happen to me, I'm planning to stay working until I'm 70 if I can. But I know even with that, even with me putting away as much money as I can, even with the company that I work for putting away money into my RSP as well, I know I'm not going to have a great whack of cash, and I'll have even less if Danielle Smith takes my CPP. So then I look at it and I go, I've got a kid that for whatever, because of her health issues, she's probably not going to have the advantage that I had of being able to get into a decent job and make a decent wage and have a decent RSP set aside. Unless things change rapidly, and I don't see it happen. So as a mom, I look at by 70, my health is probably going to be shit. And I can't do anything to protect my CPP, but I can do something to say, okay, that's it. I'm out. I want MAID. I'm choosing MAID to get out, and then I can put that RRSP that I was setting aside from working, I can leave it to her and get her sister helping to manage it, so that in the end, for whatever she ends up doing, that she will have a decent amount of money to live on. Because I'm a mom, I gotta protect her. She doesn't have anything but me and her sister. But
See, this is why I'm sorry to jump in, Tammy, but I just have to say it. This is why to me, the universal basic income has to be a bigger conversation in this country.
I agree.
Because listening to the amount of pain in your voice as you're trying to map out the future for yourself and for your kid, that is something. And I know you're not an isolated case. I know you're not alone. That is something to me that would be so easily mitigated if the province or the country or somebody put on their big kid pants and pull the trigger on it. I mean, the evidence is so clear for it. And, like I think about how much stress that you're carrying, and I'm certain that your daughter has some awareness of
she does.
of the impact. And that to me is the type of thing that, again, like it's just so ridiculous that is a conversation that people have to continue to bang. Like that should be, I'm going to do this. Here's how I'm going to come at this, because if I don't, I'm going to end up crying too. I opened up the show by talking about the poll that showed that the NDP were so far behind in everything. And this is, to me, one of those areas where I don't know why the NDP is not talking about a UBI for the province of Alberta. I don't know why they're not talking about that. Because there's ways that you could structure it. There's caveats and things and all of that. But I don't understand why that is not a thing. And so if you're listening, NDP, get your shit together.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, because I 100% agree. Right now, because she's an adult, we were able to get her on social services, the one that she's not expected to work. But the only reason she's getting that, and it won't last forever, she gets that until the middle of January, so she'll get the January check. But then they'll probably switch her over to expecting her to work. And the only reason she was able to get that is because her doctor is trying to treat her juvenile rheumatoid. She got it when she was a kid, so it was classified as juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, and she was put on Enbrel at the time, and at the time it was the brand new thing. So they put her on it, and it put her into remission, and she was in remission until about January of last year. And I was like, "Are you sure you're rheumatoid arthritis?" "No, I'm okay. I'm just, but it got worse. It got worse. And then she came to me and she said, "Mom, I think it's back." And they were right. She was right. She was out of remission. So she has full on rheumatoid arthritis. They just call it rheumatoid now, even though she got it when she was a kid. So then it was juvenile rheumatoid. But they don't even call it juvenile rheumatoid arthritis now. It's juvenile, a word that means that they don't know quite why it happened, arthritis, because the names are always changing for these things. But they won't just put her straight on Enbrel again. Because that was my thing, is I'm like, okay, why can't you just put her on that? Well, that's not treatment protocol. So now they put her on one thing and it wasn't working and it was making her sick all the time. And so now they've got her on something else and it seems like maybe it might be working, but we don't know. And Alberta doesn't consider rheumatoid arthritis to be debilitating. So she's not disabled as far as they're concerned, even though she can barely walk. And sometimes her mother, who's had 2 strokes, can move more easily than she can. And she's 26. And Mom is 54. And I can move easily than she can, even though I use a cane to get around. But I get so frustrated with people who support Danielle Smith and her bullcrap and then claim to be Christian. It's like, you're not Christian, because if you were actually Christian by the definition, by Jesus, he wouldn't like what you're doing. It's the same thing as the people in the States that claim they're Christians. You're not Christian. If Jesus came back today, you'd probably call him names and treat him really poorly.
Oh, he'd be a socialist commie for sure.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, Tammy, thank you so much for sharing all of that.
No problem. Anyway, glad to see you guys and have a Merry Christmas and all. And I really do support the giving. I made a comment on the other
Patreon
thing. Yeah, but I think that's awesome.
Well,
That's
thank
the
you.
best Christmas present you could do for all of us.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. And we will. I don't intend on getting as sick as I got last month anytime soon. So I don't. The plan is I'll do the various plugs and then we'll shut it down for the evening. But the plan is we will definitely, hopefully, as long as I don't get hit by some sort of viral bus, again, we'll be back next Sunday for a regular time. Where we will be doing another live show because, like I said at the beginning of the show, there's a lot of things that have happened in the last month, and we got some things that we got to catch up on. We're also planning our roundup show for the year-end thinger, and we've got some things in the works that we want to talk about. We filed. God, I think we filed like 8 FOIPs or something ridiculous just about a month ago. We're starting to get some results back from that. We're going to be doing a very special episode in the new year about the counter signal, the angry Caillou, Cian Bexty thing, because they're getting a lot of money from the provincial government, and there's a bit of a theme that's starting to emerge. So we're gonna take a look at the history of Mr. Bexty and the counter signal coming up in the new year with one of those FOIPs. Like I said, we have a couple other FOIPs that we're very excited to get back, and we'll be bringing those out in episodes as we get them. So we got a lot planned, and we will be back next weekend, barring unforeseen shenanigans. We've got a couple of interviews coming up as well that we're very excited for. We turned on the fire hose for a bit there, so we're going to be slowing things down for a little bit so everybody can catch up. But we've got a couple of interviews. We've got a couple of conversations that I think are going to be very spicy, a little bit challenging, perhaps, but in a good way. So keep your eye out for those. We'll talk about more about those as we get them done. And again, I want to reiterate, please check out the show notes tonight because we are going to include the link for the donations to Skipping Stone, and that's the show. Thanks, everybody. I want to say huge thanks to the chat. You guys have been great tonight. I've been enjoying watching it out of the corner of my eye as we go. I want to thank a huge thanks to both Ziad and Tammy for weighing in on the open mic. And thanks to everybody who's listening. I got to do a question because there's one in the chat before I finish the wrap up. So when we do the live streams, the show notes aren't included because we don't always know the direction that things are going to go. So we will be editing the show notes shortly to include all of the links and the things. So if you're listening to this or watching this on the 8th, come back on the 9th. The link will be there. I promise. And that's it. Thank you, everybody. It's so good to be back. It's so good to do a live show again. Thank you, everybody who's tuned in, listening. If you're listening to the podcast version, thank you for listening there. If you're watching on the YouTubes, smash that subscribe button, as they say. The little bell thing tells you when we're doing more of these, I'm told. So do the bell thing too. And I think that's pretty much it. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a great week. And as always, keep the conversation going.